August 11th, 480 BC. A Spartan king in his 50s stood with 300 warriors wearing bronze and crimson, staring down the largest invasion force ever assembled. Behind them, 7,000 Greeks. Before them, 250,000 Persian soldiers stretching to the horizon. By the third sunset, this narrow mountain pass would be a graveyard that saved Western civilization. Think about those numbers. 7,000, 300 defenders against 250,000 invaders. That's a 34-to-1 disadvantage. The fate of Greece democracy itself hung on 3 days in a corridor 20 meters wide. Yet by the end of this video, you'll understand how Leonidas and his crimson-cloaked Spartans turned geography into the deadliest weapon in military history. I'm about to reveal 3 things that will change how you see ancient warfare forever. First, the brutal rotation system that let 300 men hold off waves of thousands. Second, why Xerxes' elite immortals who'd never lost a battle broke and ran. And third, the traitor's secret that ended everything, and the horrifying final stand that followed. But here's what makes this truly unbelievable. How did Spartans fight for 72 hours straight in 30-pound bronze armor? Why did Xerxes sit and watch his empire's finest get slaughtered for 3 days? How did 1,400 men choose to stay and die when they knew a mountain path had doomed them? To understand how a narrow pass became history's most legendary killing ground, we need to step back to when Greece itself was counting its final hours. Spring 480 BC, and every Greek city-state received the same message. Xerxes, great king of Persia, was coming with an army that drank rivers dry. At the Spartan assembly in Lacedaemon, 40-year-old King Leonidas I stood before the ephors, Sparta's 5 elected magistrates, and made a request that violated every military tradition his city held sacred. He asked to march to war with just 300 Spartiates, full Spartan citizens, knowing he was leading them to certain death. The ephors consulted the oracle at Delphi, and her prophecy was clear as Aegean water. Either Sparta falls, or a Spartan king dies. Leonidas understood immediately. He wasn't being sent to win. He was being sent to buy time with his life, and he'd need men willing to pay the same price. Here's what makes this selection genuinely insane. Leonidas didn't choose his 300 randomly. Every man selected had to meet one non-negotiable criterion: living sons. This wasn't about military prowess. These were all elite Spartiates who'd survived the Agoge, Sparta's brutal state education system. This was about ensuring bloodlines continued after their inevitable deaths. Think about that decision for a second. Leonidas was selecting fathers specifically because they could be sacrificed without ending family lines. He was choosing men whose deaths wouldn't create demographic catastrophe. But who were these men, really? Each of the 300 had been taken from their mothers at age 7 and thrust into the Agoge, a training regimen so violent that modern special forces would consider it child abuse. They'd spent 13 years learning to kill, endure pain, and function as a single organism in phalanx formation. They slept on reeds they gathered themselves. They were deliberately underfed to teach them to steal food, and beaten savagely if caught, not for stealing but for incompetence. At age 20, they'd faced the Cryptia, a rite where they were sent into the countryside to hunt and kill helots, Sparta's slave population, to practice murder without hesitation. The numbers of Spartan training were mathematically brutal. Of every 100 boys who entered the Agoge, roughly 40 survived to become full Spartiates. Accidents, exposure, training injuries, and the deliberate culling of weaker candidates meant that standing before Leonidas were 300 men who represented the top 2% of Spartan male society. They'd trained together for over 3 decades. They could form phalanx, break, reform, and execute complex tactical maneuvers without a single spoken order. Here's where it gets darker. Leonidas wasn't constrained by the festival of Carneia, a religious holiday that normally prevented Sparta from marching to war in late summer. The ephors had given him permission to violate sacred law because they knew these 300 weren't coming back. This was a suicide mission, dressed as a delaying action. Sparta's full army, perhaps 8,000 Spartiates plus 35,000 Helot auxiliaries, would follow after the festival ended. But those 3 weeks of religious observance meant Leonidas would face the Persians alone. The 300 understood exactly what they were volunteering for. When Leonidas announced the selection, he didn't promise glory or survival. He promised only that their names would be remembered. One Spartiate, Dionysus, exemplified their mindset. When told the Persian arrows would be so numerous they'd block out the sun, he laughed and replied, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." This wasn't bravado. This was men who'd been conditioned since childhood to view death in battle as the highest achievement possible. On the morning of departure, the 300 Spartiates donned their crimson cloaks, dyed red so blood wouldn't show, and picked up their 8-foot dories and 17-pound hoplon shields. They kissed their wives and sons goodbye. Spartan women famously told their men, "Come back with your shield or on it." What they marched toward would redefine impossible. But first, they needed to see exactly what was coming for them. Xerxes I, the 4th great king of the Achaemenid Empire, had been planning this invasion for 4 years. His father Darius had been humiliated at Marathon a decade earlier, and Xerxes would not repeat that failure. The army he assembled was beyond comprehension. The ancient historian Herodotus claimed 2.6 million, though modern scholars estimate 200,000 to 300,000 combat troops, plus support personnel. They came from 46 nations: Persian spearmen in scale armor and felt caps, Median cavalry with javelins, Bactrian horsemen, Indian archers, Ethiopian warriors with lion-skin shields, Thracian footmen with fox fur caps. The Immortals, Xerxes' 10,000-strong royal guard, commanded by Hydarnes, wore gold jewelry and carried wicker shields faced with iron, their name coming from the fact that every casualty was instantly replaced to maintain exactly 10,000 men. Let those numbers sink in for a second. Even using conservative modern estimates, this was the largest expeditionary force ever assembled in ancient history. 200,000 combat troops meant this army consumed approximately 160 tons of grain per day just to feed the soldiers, not counting horses, pack animals, or camp followers. Supply trains stretched for miles. When this force stopped to camp, it covered 12 square miles of ground. Ancient sources claimed that when they drank from rivers, those rivers ran dry. That wasn't exaggeration, it was logistics. Here's what the Greek chronicles don't tell you. Xerxes' invasion was an engineering marvel that rivaled the military component. To cross the Hellespont, the strait separating Asia from Europe, Persian engineers constructed 2 parallel pontoon bridges using 674 warships, lashed together with flax and papyrus cables, each cable requiring 6,000 pounds of tension. The bridges stretched 4,200 feet across open water. When storms destroyed the first attempt, Xerxes ordered the Hellespont itself whipped with chains and the engineers beheaded. The second construction succeeded. For 7 days and 7 nights, the Persian army marched across those bridges, a continuous stream of humanity flowing from Asia into Europe. The vanguard alone numbered 80,000 men. They moved in perfect formation, cavalry screening the flanks, infantry columns in the center, baggage trains protected by rear guards. Persian military doctrine was sophisticated beyond anything Greece had seen. Each unit of 10,000 men, a myria barkon, was subdivided into units of 1,000, 100, and 10, creating a command structure that allowed rapid tactical adaptation. Officers carried golden pomegranates on their spear butts to designate rank. The Immortals carried golden apples, but here's where it gets genuinely insane. Xerxes wasn't just bringing soldiers. He'd mobilized the entire economic output of the largest empire on Earth. His fleet numbered 1,207 triremes warships with 3 banks of oars and bronze rams, plus 3,000 transport vessels. Each trireme required 200 rowers and 30 marines. That's another 246,000 naval personnel. Add the camp followers, slaves, merchants, engineers, prostitutes, smiths, and the total expedition numbered close to 500,000 human beings moving across Greece like a migrating nation. Think about what this meant strategically. Every Greek city-state combined could field perhaps 50,000 hoplites maximum. Xerxes had brought a force 6 times larger than Greece's total military capacity. This wasn't an invasion, it was extinction-level threat. If Persia won, Greek independence ended forever. Democracy, barely 50 years old in Athens, would be strangled in its cradle. Western philosophy, theater, mathematics, all of it would become footnotes in Persian administrative records. And this unstoppable force was marching south through Thrace, through Macedonia, through Thessaly, crushing every city that dared resist. By early August 480 BC, they'd reached the northern borders of central Greece. Directly in their path was a pass 15 meters wide, and in that pass stood Leonidas with 7,300 men who'd just received their death sentences. The Greek alliance, led by Sparta's warrior diplomacy and Athens' naval power, knew they couldn't meet Persia in open battle. They needed terrain that would neutralize Persian numbers, and the Phocian scouts found it. Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a coastal pass in central Greece where sulfurous hot springs bubbled from the cliffs. At its narrowest point, the passage was just 15 meters wide, pinched between the Kalydromos Mountains and the Malian Gulf. An ancient Phocian wall, crumbling but rebuildable, stood at the center. Here, thousands would die attacking dozens. But there was one problem the Greeks didn't know about. A narrow mountain track called the Thermopylae path wound through the hills, bypassing the entire position. Local Phocians assured Leonidas they'd guard it. This promise would doom everyone. Think about those dimensions for a second. 15 meters, roughly 50 feet, was the width of the killing ground at the middle gate, the narrowest section. That's the width of a modern 2-lane highway. Now imagine funneling 200,000 men through that space, while defenders stab, slash, and push from behind interlocked bronze shields. The mathematics of force projection became instantly catastrophic for attackers. Where Xerxes could deploy perhaps 10,000 men simultaneously on an open battlefield front, Thermopylae reduced his tactical advantage to whatever fit in, 15 meters, maybe 40 men, shoulder to shoulder, maximum. Here's what made this position genuinely brilliant. The phalanx formation required exactly this kind of confined space to become unstoppable. A hoplite phalanx in open terrain was vulnerable to cavalry flanking and missile troops. But pressed against a mountain on one side and sea on the other, with shields overlapping and spears projecting forward in 3 ranks, the phalanx became a bronze wall that advanced, killed, and ground forward like a human meat grinder. Xerxes' cavalry, his most mobile, devastating weapon, was completely neutralized. Horses couldn't charge through salt, marsh, and surf. Leonidas arrived at Thermopylae in mid-August 480 BC with his advance force and immediately set engineers to rebuilding the Phocian wall. The original structure had been built centuries earlier to defend against Thessalian invasions, but time and weather had reduced it to rubble. Within 3 days, Greek labor had reconstructed a defensive barrier 6 feet high and 4 feet thick, positioned perfectly at the middle gate. Behind this wall, defenders could rest, rotate, and reform, while attackers exhausted themselves trying to breach it. But here's where the fatal weakness lay hidden. The Thermopylae path, a goat track winding through the Kalydromos Mountains, climbed 1,200 feet above the pass, traversed the ridgeline for roughly 2 miles, then descended behind the Greek position. Local Phocians knew every twist of this track. They'd used it for generations to move livestock and avoid tolls. When Leonidas questioned them about alternate routes, they assured him the Thermopylae was the only bypass, and they'd guard it with 1,000 Phocian hoplites positioned at the summit. Leonidas accepted this intelligence and positioned his forces accordingly. The 300 Spartans would anchor the wall's center, the killing ground where fighting would be fiercest. Allied contingents would rotate through the line in shifts, keeping fresh troops at the front while exhausted fighters rested. The Phocians would hold the mountain path, simple, defensible, mathematically sound. What Leonidas didn't know, what the Phocians themselves might not have fully understood, was that the Thermopylae path wasn't just a tactical bypass. It was a strategic death sentence. Any force that controlled that mountain track controlled the entire pass. The Greeks had placed their survival in the hands of 1,000 Phocian militia, whose discipline and courage would be tested against Persia's most elite soldiers. On August 16, 480 BC, Persian scouts reached the northern approach to Thermopylae and saw the Greek position for the first time. They reported back to Xerxes. 7,000 Greeks blocking the road, rebuilding an ancient wall. Seemingly unaware they were about to face the largest army in human history. What those scouts witnessed next would confuse Xerxes so badly he'd wait 4 full days before attacking 4 days the Greeks desperately needed. Leonidas didn't march alone. The 300 Spartans, chosen specifically because they had living sons to continue their bloodlines, were joined by 2,120 Arcadians, 1,000 Phocians, 1,000 Locrians, 400 Corinthians, 400 Thebans, some possibly hostages, 200 men from Phlius, 80 Mycenaeans, and 700 Thespians. Every man was a hoplite, heavily armored infantry trained to fight in the phalanx formation. They wore bronze Corinthian helmets that covered everything but their eyes and mouth, bronze cuirasses protecting their torsos, and bronze greaves on their shins. Their primary weapon was the dory, an 8-foot ashwood spear with an iron leaf-shaped blade and bronze butt spike. Their shield, the hoplon, was 3 feet of wood, bronze, and leather weighing 17 pounds. In the phalanx, these shields overlapped, creating a bronze wall. Here's what made them lethal. A hoplite phalanx in a narrow pass was essentially an ancient meat grinder. Let that sink in. Each hoplite carried roughly 30 pounds of bronze armor plus weapons equivalent to wearing a full backpack while fighting in hand-to-hand combat for hours at a time. The Corinthian helmet alone weighed 4 pounds and restricted vision to a narrow slit directly ahead. Peripheral vision was non-existent. Hearing was muffled to dull roars. Inside that bronze shell, in August heat, fighting became an act of suffocation and endurance as much as skill. Yet these men trained to fight for hours without removing their helmets, trusting the shields of their brothers to protect their blind sides. Here's what the chronicles don't tell you about phalanx mechanics. The formation was 8 men deep at Thermopylae. The front 3 ranks held their dories, projecting forward at chest height 24 feet of overlapping spear points, creating a nearly impenetrable hedge of iron. Ranks 4 through 8 kept their spears vertical or angled upward, ready to step forward when front rank fighters fell or tired. But the real killing power came from the othismos, the push. The rear 5 ranks physically shoved forward, adding their body weight and momentum to drive the front ranks into enemy lines like a human battering ram. Think about those physics for a second. 8 men deep, standing shoulder to shoulder, each weighing 150 to 180 pounds plus 30 pounds of armor. That's roughly 1,500 pounds of force per shield, compressed into 3 square feet. When a hoplite phalanx hit an enemy line, it wasn't a battle. It was a controlled avalanche of bronze and muscle that crushed opposition through pure mechanical advantage. Men in the front ranks often died not from enemy weapons but from being trampled and suffocated in the press. The Greek contingents represented almost every city-state that had answered the call. The Arcadians' mountain warriors from the Peloponnese interior were renowned for endurance fighting. The Corinthians brought wealth and discipline from Greece's richest commercial city. The Thespians, from a small city that could barely afford to arm 700 men, had sent their entire adult male population, knowing most wouldn't return. That detail is staggering. Thespiae had chosen potential extinction over submission to Persia. But here's where the coalition revealed its fatal weakness: unity of purpose, not unity of commitment. Most of these contingents expected to fight for days, then withdraw before encirclement. They'd volunteered to delay Persia, not die fighting it. Only the Spartans and Thespians understood this was a one-way march. The others were already planning retreat routes, watching for signals to withdraw, calculating how long they could fight before the situation became hopeless. Leonidas positioned them carefully. Spartans at the wall's center where fighting would be most brutal. Allied contingents rotating through the line in scheduled shifts, 4 hours of combat, 8 hours of rest. The Phocians on the mountain path, the Locrians as mobile reserves. Every man knew his position, his rotation schedule, his rally point if the line broke. On August 17th, 480 BC, as the Greek forces completed their defensive preparations, Persian scouts returned to Xerxes with detailed intelligence on Greek numbers, positions, and equipment. The great king's response would shock everyone watching. He laughed. And then he waited 4 days for these fools to surrender or flee. Late August, 480 BC, and Xerxes' advance forces reached the northern edge of the pass. Persian scouts rode forward to assess the Greek position and returned with a report that made Xerxes laugh. The Spartans were outside the rebuilt Phocian wall, exercising naked and combing their long hair. Xerxes summoned Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king serving as his advisor, and asked what this bizarre behavior meant. Demaratus's reply chilled the tent. These men have come to fight us for the pass, and they are preparing for that. It is their custom to tend their hair carefully when they are about to risk their lives. Xerxes waited 4 days, expecting the Greeks to flee. They didn't move. On the 5th day, August 17th, 480 BC, his patience ended. He sent forward the Medes and Scythians' expendable troops with orders to take the pass and bring the Greeks back alive. Here's what those scouts actually witnessed that confused them so badly. Spartans performing gymnastic, ritualized physical exercises done completely naked. Their long hair unbound and flowing as they practiced combat movements, wrestling holds, and spear thrusts. This wasn't random training. This was a death ritual. Spartans grew their hair long from age 20 onward as a mark of full citizenship. Before battle, they would oil it, comb it, and braid it carefully, not from vanity, but because they believed long hair made a handsome man more beautiful and an ugly man more terrifying. They were preparing to die beautifully. The Persian scouts had never seen anything like it. In their empire, soldiers prepared for battle by checking equipment, sharpening weapons, praying to Ahura Mazda. These Greeks were grooming themselves like women preparing for a festival. The scouts reported this to Xerxes as evidence of Greek effeminacy and weakness. These fools were so unserious about war, they were doing gymnastics and hairdressing instead of fortifying their position. Xerxes' 4-day wait was a calculated psychological weapon. He positioned his army in full view of the pass, 200,000 men covering the northern plain like a living carpet. Every morning, the Greeks would wake to see that impossible host arrayed against them. Every night, thousands of Persian campfires stretched to the horizon. The message was clear. Surrender now, or watch your allies desert as the weight of Persian inevitability crushed their courage. But here's what genuinely shocked Xerxes. The Greeks didn't just stay, they got more casual. By day 3, Spartans were exercising closer to the Persian lines, almost taunting them. By day 4, they were sitting outside the wall, combing their hair in plain view of scouts. Demaratus tried desperately to make Xerxes understand what he was seeing. Your Majesty, these are Spartans. They do not flee. They do not surrender. They have come here to fight for the pass, and they will die before they yield an inch of ground. The hair combing is not vanity, it is their death right. They are telling you they are ready to die. Xerxes dismissed this as the bitter words of an exile, trying to inflate his countrymen's reputation. No force of 7,000 could stand against 200,000. This was mathematical impossibility. On August 17th, Xerxes' patience snapped. He summoned his Median and Scythian commanders, roughly 10,000 troops drawn from subject peoples, not ethnic Persians. Go, he ordered. Bring them to me alive if possible. Kill them if necessary. But I want this pass cleared by sunset. And I want these Spartans kneeling before my throne by morning. The commanders bowed, assembled their forces, and began marching into the pass with the confidence of men who'd conquered from India to Egypt. They expected frightened Greeks to break and run the moment they saw 10,000 troops advancing in formation. What they got instead was 1,000. 500 Greeks, Spartans in the front ranks standing motionless behind their wall, shields locked, spears angled forward, waiting. At 9 a.m. on August 17th, 480 BC, the Median forces reached javelin range and launched their first assault. What happened in the next 2 hours would shock both armies and rewrite Persian understanding of Greek warfare. Dawn, Day 1. The Median and Sicyan forces, roughly 10,000 men in lighter armor with wicker shields and shorter spears, advanced into the pass with confidence born from conquering half of Asia. They'd never lost. They outnumbered these Greeks 20-1 at minimum. At the Phocian Wall, Leonidas had positioned the full Greek force in rotation, 1,500 men across the 15-meter width, shields locked, spears projecting forward in 3 ranks. The Medes crashed into them like a wave hitting granite. Immediately, the Persian disadvantage became catastrophic. Their shorter spears couldn't reach past the Greek shields. Their wicker shields shattered against bronze-tipped dories. Their lighter armor offered no protection against 8 feet of ash and iron. And the pass was so narrow they couldn't use their numbers, only the front rank could fight. And the Greek front rank was Spartans who'd trained for this exact scenario since age 7. Here's where the mathematics of weapon reach became lethal. Median spears measured roughly 6 feet long, standard for mobile infantry designed to fight in loose formation. Greek dories stretched 8 feet, with the front 3 ranks holding them projecting forward. That 2-foot difference meant Greek spear points reached Median faces and throats, while Persian weapons stabbed uselessly at bronze shields and empty air. The first Medes to close with the phalanx died without landing a single blow, impaled through the throat, face, or chest by spears they couldn't even reach to parry. 9:15 a.m. The killing accelerates. Spartans in the front rank thrust their dories in practiced 2-count rhythm, extend over the shield, drive the iron leaf blade downward into necks and shoulders, withdraw before counterattack. Their Corinthian helmets, which eliminated peripheral vision, actually helped. They stared straight ahead like bronze-faced automatons, trusting their shield brothers completely. Behind them, 2nd and 3rd rank Greeks angled their spears through gaps, creating a hedge of death that nothing human could penetrate. Median soldiers tried desperately to break through, climbing over their own dead, but the geometry was impossible. Push forward and you were impaled. Stand still and the phalanx ground forward, shields shoving you backward into your own ranks. Think about those casualty rates for a second. Modern estimates suggest the Medes lost 150 to 200 men in the first 15 minutes of fighting. That's 10 men dying every 60 seconds in a space 15 meters wide. The front ranks became a compressed nightmare of screaming men, shattered shields, and bronze spear points that darted like serpent strikes. Greek shields were rimmed with bronze that could smash faces and break bones when used as weapons. When Median soldiers finally got close enough for hand-to-hand combat, Spartans would punch with their shield edge, breaking jaws and collarbones, then stab with the xiphos, the brutal 2-foot sword designed for close killing. But here's what the Persian commanders didn't understand. The Greeks weren't getting tired. At 9:45 a.m., Leonidas rotated his front ranks. Fresh Arcadian hoplites stepped forward seamlessly, while exhausted Spartans withdrew 8 steps and removed their helmets, gasping for air. The phalanx never broke. The wall never wavered. Medes, who thought they were finally breaking Greek resistance, suddenly faced fresh troops who'd been resting for 30 minutes. The psychological impact was devastating. How do you defeat an enemy who never tires? By 10:30 a.m., Median bodies were stacked 3 deep at the wall's base, creating a literal ramp of corpses that subsequent attackers had to climb. The footing became treacherous, blood-slicked stone, intestines, shattered shields, and dying men reaching up to grab ankles. Median officers screamed orders that no one could hear over the cacophony of bronze on bronze, men screaming, and the horrible sound of spear points punching through flesh and scraping against bone. At 11 a.m., after 2 hours of sustained combat, the Median commander made the call every military officer dreads: full retreat. His forces broke and ran, leaving roughly 2,000 dead and wounded behind. Greek casualties, 43 men. Most had died not from direct combat but from heat exhaustion inside bronze armor under August sun. Xerxes watched from his golden throne on the hillside, stunned into silence. According to Herodotus, he leapt from his seat 3 times in fear for his army. This wasn't supposed to be possible, but he had a solution. The Immortals, 10,000 elite warriors who'd never failed him, who wore better armor and fought with superior discipline. What happened when they entered the pass would be even worse. Here's where it gets insane. The Spartans weren't just holding the line, they were using tactical rotations that modern militaries would recognize. Fresh troops from the rear ranks would seamlessly replace tired fighters in the front, keeping the killing edge sharp while exhausted. Medes stayed locked in combat until they dropped. The Corinthian helmets, which limited peripheral vision, actually helped Spartans learn to trust the shields of the men beside them, creating an unbreakable psychological bond. Their dories would strike over the shield wall, stabbing down into necks and faces, then withdraw before Persian weapons could respond. When a dory broke, and they broke constantly against bone and armor, the Spartan would draw his xiphos, a 2-foot iron sword designed for close-quarters stabbing. The pass became a slaughterhouse. Median bodies piled 3 deep in some places. After 2 hours of sustained combat, the Medes retreated in disorder, leaving over 2,000 dead. Greek casualties, roughly 40, mostly from the front ranks. Here's what military historians don't emphasize enough. The rotation system was mathematically brilliant. Every 15 minutes, a horn would sound barely audible over the chaos, and the front 3 ranks would execute a practiced maneuver called anachoresis. The front rank would take 3 steps backward through gaps that opened instantly in the formation. Second rank became first. Third became second. 4th through 8th ranks all stepped forward 1 position. The exhausted fighters who'd just left the front would move to the rear, remove their helmets, drink water, and recover for 45 minutes before rotating back. Think about that timing. 15 minutes of maximum combat intensity, then 45 minutes of rest. The Spartans could sustain this rhythm indefinitely. The Medes had no rotation system. Their front ranks fought until they died or broke. But here's where it gets genuinely brutal. Dory breakage rates were catastrophic. Ancient spears were ash, wood, flexible and light, but they'd snap when thrust hard into bone or when Persian soldiers grabbed them and tried to pull the wielder forward. Modern combat archaeology suggests roughly 30% of dories broke in the first hour of sustained fighting. That meant 450 spears shattering in 60 minutes. Every Spartan trained for this moment. The instant a dory snapped, the left hand would release the shaft, the right hand would drop to the belt, and the xiphos would clear its sheath in one fluid motion. The xiphos was 20 inches of iron designed specifically for the press of phalanx combat. No slashing that required too much space. Just short, brutal upward thrusts into groins, bellies, and under raised arms where armor was weakest. 10:15 a.m. and the Median assault wave begins to collapse psychologically. Soldiers in the rear ranks can see the corpse piles growing at the wall. They can hear the screaming, not just wounded men dying, but the living screaming in terror as they're pushed forward into the grinding bronze machine. Some Medes simply refuse to advance, standing frozen while officers beat them with clubs. Others throw down their weapons and flee through their own ranks. This isn't cowardice. It's rational response to mathematically impossible odds. You can't defeat an enemy. You can't reach, can't wound, can't exhaust. The corpse problem becomes tactical. By 10:45 a.m., Median bodies are stacked so high at the wall's base that they create a ramp nearly 4 feet tall. Persian soldiers must literally climb over their own dead to reach Greek spears. The footing is nightmarish, blood-slick stone, entrails, severed limbs creating a surface where every step could mean falling into the killing zone. Wounded Medes, not yet dead, grab at ankles and legs of men climbing over them, creating a grotesque obstacle course. Greek spearmen adjust their aim upward, stabbing down at climbers who present perfect targets, exposed faces, raised arms, backs bent forward. At 11 a.m., the Median commander, never named in sources, probably dead by this point, signals retreat with horn blasts. What follows isn't an organized withdrawal, but a panicked rout. Men at the rear flee immediately. Men at the front, trapped in the press, die trying to break away. The Greeks don't pursue. Leonidas's orders were clear. Hold the wall, nothing more. Let them run. Final count. 2,000 Median dead. Greek casualties. 43 killed, perhaps 120 wounded, mostly shield arm injuries and spear thrusts that found gaps in armor. That's a 46-to-1 kill ratio. The numbers defied belief. Xerxes sits on his golden throne, watching his subject troops flee in disorder, and makes a decision that will haunt Persian military history. He summons Hydarnes, commander of the Immortals, and gives an order that cannot be refused. Take the pass. Use my guard. Bring me Leonidas in chains. The elite were going in. And they were about to learn the same lesson. Xerxes watched the Median retreat from his throne on the hillside and, according to Herodotus, leapt from his seat 3 times in fear for his army. But he had a solution: the Immortals. His elite 10,000-man royal guard, who'd crushed every army from India to Egypt. These weren't conscripts, they were professional soldiers in scale armor, carrying iron-faced wicker shields and 8-foot spears, trained in both melee and archery. Hydarnes, their commander, led them into the pass at noon, with orders to bring back the Spartan king's head. The result shocked everyone. The Immortals had the same problems as the Medes, but worse, their superior training meant they stayed in the meat grinder longer, taking higher casualties. The Greeks rotated fresh troops into the line. The Immortals stayed locked in combat until exhaustion and wounds forced them back. After 3 hours, Hydarnes withdrew. Over 1,000 Immortals lay dead or dying. The Greeks had lost perhaps 80 men total. Here's what made the Immortals genuinely elite. They were full-time professional soldiers who trained together year-round, equipped at royal expense with the best weapons Persian metallurgy could produce. Their scale armor, thousands of small bronze plates sewn onto leather backing, offered better protection than Median felt and cloth. Their wicker shields were reinforced with iron facings that wouldn't shatter like standard wicker. Most importantly, their spears matched Greek dory length at 8 feet, eliminating the reach disadvantage that had slaughtered the Medes. They also carried composite bows and full quivers 40 arrows each, giving them ranged capability. Hydarnes believed this combination of better equipment and superior discipline would break the Greek line within the hour. 12:15 p.m., day 1. The Immortals advance into the pass in perfect formation, shields overlapping, spears leveled. They step over and around Median corpses without breaking stride, a testament to their training. At 100 meters, they stop, raise their bows, and release a coordinated volley. 4,000 arrows arc into the afternoon sky. The Greeks see them coming and execute the testudo, crouching behind their hoplon shields, overlapping them overhead to create a bronze roof. Arrows clatter off bronze like hail on stone. Perhaps 20 Greeks fall, struck through gaps or in unprotected legs. The rest stand, reform the phalanx, and wait. The Immortals advance again, loosing 2 more volleys as they close. The Greeks take casualties, maybe 40 men total, but the phalanx holds. At 50 meters, the Immortals shoulder their bows, level their spears, and charge. The crash of contact is deafening. 2,000 Immortals in the front ranks, slamming into 500 Spartans and Arcadians at the wall. And here's where their advantages evaporate. Equal spear reach means simultaneous strikes. But Greek bronze armor is thicker, Greek shields are heavier and more stable. And Greek training for phalanx combat is more intensive. Within 5 minutes, 100 Immortals are down. The Greeks have lost 12. Think about what this meant psychologically. The Immortals had never faced troops who could match them in equipment and exceed them in skill. Every army they'd fought, Indian spearmen, Scythian horsemen, Babylonian conscripts, had broken within minutes of contact. These Greeks weren't breaking, they were advancing. At 12:45 p.m., Leonidas orders the phalanx forward 3 steps. The Greeks push, shields locked, and the Immortals give ground for the first time in their legendary history. The psychological impact is devastating. Elite soldiers trained to conquer are being shoved backward by men they outnumber 6-1. But here's where Hydarnes's discipline showed. The Immortals didn't panic. They fought with technical precision, probing for weaknesses, trying to hook Greek shields with spear points to create gaps. They rotated wounded men out of the front ranks and pushed fresh fighters forward, a slower, cruder version of the Greek rotation system. The problem was mathematical. They were still feeding men into a narrow corridor where superior numbers meant nothing. At 1:30 p.m., immortal casualties exceed 400. The Greeks have lost perhaps 50. By 2 p.m., the Immortals are fighting in 3 shifts, front ranks collapsing from exhaustion after 20 minutes, staggering to the rear while fresh troops take their place. But they have no systematic rotation, no rest period. Exhausted Immortals recover for 10 minutes, then get shoved back into combat. The Greeks, meanwhile, are on their second full rotation cycle. Every fighter has had at least 30 minutes of rest. The killing continues with mechanical efficiency. Spears thrust, men scream, bodies pile higher. At 3 p.m., after 3 hours of sustained combat, Hydarnes faces military reality. His elite guard is being destroyed. Over 1,000 Immortals lie dead or dying in the pass. His remaining forces are exhausted, demoralized, and visibly shaken. He signals retreat. The withdrawal is orderly. Immortals backing away in formation. Shields raised, but it's still a retreat. The force that had never lost has just been mauled by an army 1/7 its size. Xerxes watches them withdraw and realizes something that chills him to his core. If his best troops can't break 7,000 Greeks in a narrow pass, nothing in his army can. But he has 200,000 men. He'll send wave after wave, hour after hour, until these Greeks drown in Persian blood. What he doesn't know is that Leonidas has been planning for exactly this strategy, and he's about to unveil a tactical innovation that will turn Persian persistence into a death trap. Day 2, August 18th, and Leonidas introduced a tactical innovation that would be studied for centuries. The Spartans, knowing the Persians expected them to hold the wall defensively, pretended to break. Mid-battle, the front ranks suddenly turned and fled in apparent panic. The Persians, sensing victory, broke formation and charged in pursuit. 20 meters back, the fleeing Spartans spun, reformed their phalanx instantly, and slammed into the disordered Persian ranks like a bronze hammer. The slaughter was even worse than the defensive fighting. Persians died by the hundreds in the first 60 seconds. Xerxes watched his troops fall into the same trap 4 times that day. Each time, Persian dead piled higher. Greek losses remained minimal. By sunset of day 2, Persian casualties exceeded 10,000. The Greeks had lost fewer than 300. But that night, a Greek named Ephialtes came to Xerxes' tent with information that would end everything. Here's what made this tactic genuinely revolutionary. The feigned retreat, or anachoresis prophesis, required absolute discipline and trust that no ancient army except Sparta possessed. At 10 a.m., during a Persian assault by fresh Cilician troops, roughly 5,000 men, the Spartan front ranks suddenly broke contact, turned their backs, and sprinted away from the wall. To watching Persians, this looked like panic. Greek shields were slung over shoulders, spears were dropped, men were shouting in apparent terror. The Cilicians, seeing victory within grasp, screamed in triumph and charged forward in a disorganized mob, racing to cut down the fleeing Greeks before they escaped. 20 meters from the wall, exactly the distance Leonidas had calculated the Spartans' pivot. On a single horn blast, 300 men turn in perfect unison, reform phalanx in 3 seconds flat, and present a wall of bronze and iron to Cilicians, who are now running full speed with no formation, no shield wall, no mutual support. The Spartans surge forward. What happens next is pure slaughter. Disordered Persians, strung out in pursuit, hit the reformed phalanx individually or in small groups. Greek spears find unprotected sides, backs, throats. Cilician soldiers who'd been screaming in triumph 5 seconds ago are now impaled, trampled, crushed. In 90 seconds, over 200 Persians die. The survivors flee in genuine panic, stumbling over corpses and abandoned weapons. Greek casualties: 7 men, mostly from executing the turn too slowly. Think about that discipline for a second. Turning your back on an enemy and running requires every man to trust that everyone else will also turn at the signal, not 1 second early, not 1 second late. One man panicking for real could trigger actual rout. But Spartans had drilled this maneuver thousands of times since childhood. They could execute it in their sleep. And watching from his throne, Xerxes couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. His officers reported that the Greeks were breaking, then mysteriously reforming. It looked like magic. 11:30 a.m. Xerxes sends Thracian infantry 6,000 strong into the pass with orders to finish the broken Greeks. The Spartans execute the exact same maneuver. Feigned panic, 20-meter retreat, perfect turn, reformed phalanx, crushing counterattack. 300 Thracians die in the first 2 minutes. By noon, Xerxes understands this is a trick. But here's where Persian command structure fails him. He can't communicate the tactical reality to troops who are already committed to attack. At 1 p.m., Egyptian conscripts enter the pass, see Spartans fleeing, and charge into the same trap. Another 250 dead. The psychological warfare is devastating. Persian soldiers begin to understand that charging, fleeing Greeks means death. But refusing to advance means execution by their own officers for cowardice. They're trapped between 2 forms of death, one certain but delayed, the other probable but immediate. Morale collapses faster than the physical casualties accumulate. By 2 p.m., some Persian units simply refuse to enter the pass, despite being beaten by their commanders. But here's where it gets genuinely insane. Leonidas executes the feigned retreat a 4th time at 3:30 p.m. against fresh Indian archers who'd just arrived and hadn't witnessed the previous disasters. They fall into the identical trap, 400 Indians dead in less than 3 minutes. The tactic works because new troops keep entering the pass with no knowledge of what happened to previous waves, and the narrow terrain prevents lateral communication between units. By 4 p.m., Persian assault waves cease entirely, not because Xerxes calls them off, but because troops refuse to advance. Officers try threatening execution. Some soldiers choose the immediate execution over entering that pass. Let that sink in. Persian troops are choosing to be killed by their own officers rather than face Greek spears. The psychological defeat is total. Final tally for day 2. Approximately 3,000 Persian dead from the feigned retreats alone, plus another 7,000 from conventional defensive fighting throughout the day. Total, 10,000 casualties in 12 hours. Greek losses, 287 killed, roughly 600 wounded. That's a 35-to-1 kill ratio. Xerxes has lost 20,000 men in 2 days, 10% of his army, and gained exactly 0 meters of ground. As sunset turns the Malian Gulf crimson, Leonidas addresses his exhausted troops. 2 more days. Hold for 2 more days and we've saved Greece. What he doesn't know is that while he's been killing Persians in the pass, a Greek traitor named Ephialtes, bitter at being rejected for military service due to physical deformity, is walking into Xerxes' tent with a map and a proposition. The mountain path. The bypass. The secret that would turn Greece's greatest defensive victory into its most legendary last stand. Ephialtes of Malice, a local Greek, walked into the Persian camp seeking reward money and told Xerxes about the Anapeia path, a narrow track through the mountains that bypassed the entire Greek position and emerged behind their lines. Xerxes immediately summoned Hydarnes and the Immortals for a night march. The Phocian guards, 1,000 men positioned to defend this exact scenario, heard the Immortals coming at dawn on day 3. But here's the critical failure. Instead of holding the path at all costs, the Phocians retreated to higher ground to defend the summit, leaving the path open. Hydarnes didn't even pause to engage them, he kept marching. A Greek scout named Polius ran the mountain path at full sprint, racing the Immortals to warn Leonidas. He arrived at dawn, gasping that the Persians would be behind them within hours. Here's what the chronicles don't tell you about Ephialtes. He'd been rejected for hoplite service because a spinal deformity prevented him from bearing the weight of bronze armor and holding a shield in phalanx formation. In a society where military service defined citizenship and honor, this rejection had destroyed his social standing. Ancient sources claim Xerxes promised him talent, weights of gold, roughly 26 kilograms of pure gold, worth perhaps $1.5 million in modern currency. But the real payment was revenge against Greeks who deemed him unworthy to fight. At 11 p.m. on August 18th, he led Persian scouts to the base of the Thermopylae path and traced the route on clay tablets by torchlight. Midnight. Hydarnes assembles the Immortals, now down to roughly 8,500 men after 2 days of catastrophic casualties at the pass, and begins the climb. The Thermopylae path is barely 4 feet wide in most places, forcing single-file march. The distance from base to summit, approximately 1,200 vertical feet over 2 miles of switchbacks, loose stone, and narrow ledges with sheer drops. In darkness, this climb should take 6 hours minimum. Hydarnes pushes the pace to brutal speed. Men stumble, fall, break ankles on loose rocks. He doesn't care. Speed is everything. If dawn finds them still climbing, the element of surprise dies. 3:30 a.m., August 19th. The Immortals' vanguard, perhaps 500 men, crests the summit ridge, where the Thermopylae path levels out for half a mile before descending behind the Greek position. The Phocian guards, dozing around campfires, hear rustling in the oak forest. They grab their weapons and form a hasty shield wall across the path. Here's where everything goes wrong. The Phocians don't hold the path itself. They retreat upslope to higher ground, thinking elevation equals advantage. This catastrophic error opens the path completely. Hydarnes sees Greeks running uphill away from his objective and makes an instant calculation. Engaging them wastes time and men. His mission is the bypass, not battle. The Immortals march past the Phocian position without stopping. Some Phocians shoot arrows, maybe 20 Immortals fall, but 8,000 keep moving. The Phocians, trained to defend their local territory, never understood their real mission. Die holding that path. Not defend tactically. Not retreat to better ground. Die there, buying time, forcing Persians to fight through their corpses. Their failure to grasp this will doom everyone at the pass. 4:15 a.m. Polyus, a Locrian scout who'd been positioned as a runner on the summit, sees the Immortals streaming past the Phocian position and realizes the disaster unfolding. He sprints down the mountain path toward the pass, 2 miles of treacherous descent in pre-dawn darkness. His run becomes a desperate race against 8,000 Immortals who are also descending, but moving more slowly in formation. Polyus runs like his life depends on it, because 7,000 Greek lives depend on his warning, reaching Leonidas before encirclement is complete. 5:20 a.m. Dawn breaks over Thermopylae. Polyus bursts into the Greek camp, chest heaving, and delivers the message that ends everything. The Immortals are on the mountain path. They'll be behind us within 2 hours. Think about what this meant tactically. The Greeks were now caught between Xerxes' main army to the north and 8,500 Immortals descending to their south. In 2 hours, they'd be surrounded completely. The narrow pass that had been their greatest advantage would become their tomb. Leonidas calls an immediate war council. The Allied commanders understand instantly. This position is lost. The Persian force descending the mountain will emerge roughly 3 miles behind their position, close enough to cut off any organized retreat, but far enough that a fast, light infantry run might escape before encirclement closes. The mathematics are brutal. 7,000 men cannot fight in 2 directions simultaneously. They cannot defend the wall while also defending against 8,500 troops attacking from behind. The council debates for 15 minutes. Most commanders argue for immediate full retreat, save the army, fight another day. Leonidas listens silently, then delivers the order that would echo through 2,500 years of military history. Allied forces are dismissed. Return to your cities and prepare defenses. Spartans, stay. Thespians, if you wish to stay, I will not refuse your courage. The trap was closing, and 1,400 Greeks had just volunteered to die, buying time for the others to escape. Leonidas called his officers together at the Phocian wall as the sun rose on August 20th, 480 BC. The situation was mathematically simple. They were surrounded, outnumbered 30-1, and annihilation was guaranteed. He gave the Allied contingents permission to withdraw. They'd bought Greece 3 days to evacuate civilians and position the navy. Most accepted. The Corinthians marched out. The Phocians left to defend their cities. The Locrians departed. But when Leonidas dismissed the 700 Thespians under their commander Demophilus, they refused to leave. "We stay," Demophilus said simply. The 400 Thebans, possibly hostages, possibly volunteers, also remained, though their loyalty was questionable. And the 300 Spartans never even discussed leaving. Spartan law was absolute. Return with your shield or on it. Retreat was not in their vocabulary. As the departing allies filed out, a Thespian warrior asked Leonidas why he was staying. His response became legendary. "Because I am ordered to hold the pass, not to survive." The withdrawal began at 5:45 a.m. and took 90 minutes. 5,600 Greeks, marching south in organized columns before the Immortals could complete their descent and block the escape route. The Arcadians left first, their 2,120 men representing the largest contingent. Then the Corinthians, 400 wealthy citizen soldiers who'd done their duty and saw no honor in pointless death. The Phocians, whose failure to hold the mountain path had caused this disaster, departed in shame. The Locrians followed. By 7:15 a.m., the force at Thermopylae had shrunk from 7,300 to 1,400 men. Those who remained knew exactly what staying meant. They would all die today. Here's what makes the Thespian decision genuinely extraordinary. Thespiae was a tiny city-state with perhaps 10,000 total population. The 700 men who'd marched to Thermopylae represented every able-bodied adult male citizen. Every single one. When Leonidas gave them permission to leave, Demophilus, their leader, consulted with his men for less than 5 minutes. Then he walked back to Leonidas and delivered his answer. "We stay. If we abandon Sparta's king while he fights for all Greece, we are not worthy to call ourselves men. Thespiae will die as a city before we flee as cowards." Think about that decision. They were choosing potential extinction of their entire male population. Wives would become widows, children would become orphans, their city would be defenseless. And they made that choice in 5 minutes. The Theban situation remains historically murky. Some sources claim the 400 Thebans were hostages forced to join the Greek force to guarantee Thebes' loyalty to the alliance. Others suggest they were genuine volunteers from the anti-Persian faction in Theban politics. What's certain is they stayed when they could have fled. Whether from courage, coercion, or political calculation, 400 Thebans would stand with the Spartans and Thespians in the final hours. Their fate would be different. Most would attempt surrender when the situation became hopeless, but in this moment, they committed to staying. For the 300 Spartans, the decision required no discussion. Spartan law was codified in the Great Retra, their constitutional document, and it was absolute. Warriors returned home with their shields or carried on them. Retreat from battle was grounds for permanent exile and loss of citizenship. A Spartan who fled combat became a Trisontes, trembler, stripped of all rights, forbidden to marry, barred from the gymnasium, marked in public by having half his beard shaved. Death was preferable to this social annihilation. But beyond legal compulsion, there was cultural identity. Spartans defined themselves as warriors who never retreated. To flee would be to cease being Spartan. Here's what Leonidas understood that makes this sacrifice strategic, not suicidal. Every hour they held the pass was another hour for 5,600 Greeks to reach safety and spread word of Persian invasion. Every hour was another hour for Athens to evacuate civilians and the Greek fleet to position at Salamis. The Allied troops withdrawing would reach their cities within 3 days and begin coordinating defense. The stand at Thermopylae had already bought Greece 3 days. Now the 1,400 who remained would buy several more hours with their lives. The mathematics were brutal but clear. 1,400 dead might save 100,000 Greek civilians and soldiers. That was a trade worth making. 6:30 a.m. The departing Greeks march past the 1,400 who are staying. No cheering, no speeches, just silent acknowledgement of the decision. Some Allied soldiers weep openly, gratitude mixed with survivor's guilt. The Spartans stand motionless, faces unreadable beneath their helmets. The Thespians grip their weapons tighter, knowing they'll never see their homes again. Demophilus walks to Leonidas and clasps his forearm in the warrior's grip. "It has been an honor to stand with Sparta." Leonidas replies, "Greece will remember Thespia's courage when Sparta is forgotten." 7:30 a.m. The last Allied contingents disappear south down the coastal road. Leonidas turns to face his remaining 1,400 men and delivers the order that would define the next 6 hours. We advance, past the wall, into the wider pass. We make them come to us in the open, and we kill as many as we can before they kill us. Strip your cloaks. You won't need them where we're going. The Spartans remove their crimson cloaks and lay them in neat piles behind the wall. There would be no retreat to keep them clean. This was a one-way march into history. As the remaining 1,400 Greeks waited for encirclement, a Persian herald approached under flag of truce with Xerxes' final offer. "Surrender your weapons, and you may leave as friends of the great king." Leonidas, standing atop the wall in his crimson cloak and bronze armor, delivered a 2-word response in Doric Greek that would echo through 2,500 years. "Molon Labe, come and take them." Xerxes received the response and gave orders for a simultaneous assault from both sides. Here's what makes this moment genuinely insane. Knowing they were doomed, the Greeks advanced. They didn't wait behind the wall. They marched forward into the wider section of the pass to kill as many Persians as possible before they died. The Spartans removed their crimson cloaks, stripping down to just bronze and iron. There would be no retreat to keep cloaks clean. This was a one-way march. 8 a.m., August 20th, 480 BC. The Persian herald, a Greek-speaking maid in ceremonial robes, approaches the wall carrying a white cloth on a spear shaft. He's sweating despite the morning cool, terrified of these Greeks who've killed 20,000 Persians in 3 days. He delivers Xerxes' offer in formal diplomatic language. "The great king, in his mercy, offers you life. Surrender your arms and swear loyalty to the King of Kings. You will be granted lands in Persia and honored as warriors who fought bravely. This is your final chance to avoid annihilation." The 1,400 Greeks stand silent, letting the offer hang in the air. Some Thebans glance at each other, perhaps considering it. Then Leonidas steps forward. "Molon Labe, come and take them." 2 words in Doric dialect, but their meaning transcends language. This isn't just defiance, it's a declaration of absolute commitment. Leonidas is saying, "We will not surrender, we will not negotiate, we will fight until every one of us is dead, and if you want our weapons, you'll have to pry them from our corpses." The herald's face goes pale. He bows, turns, and walks back to Persian lines faster than protocol allows. Xerxes receives the message and, according to sources, flies into rage so violent his attendants fear for their lives. He's offered mercy to men who are militarily defeated, and they've spat in his face. Here's what the chronicles don't emphasize. Leonidas's decision to advance was tactically brilliant, not suicidal bravado. The wall position, which had worked perfectly for defensive fighting, was now a trap. Once the Immortals completed their descent and attacked from behind, the Greeks would be compressed against their own fortification with nowhere to maneuver. Advancing into the wider section of the pass, roughly 50 meters north of the wall, where the corridor opened to 30 meters wide, gave them space to fight on multiple fronts. They'd still be outnumbered catastrophically, but at least they could form a circular phalanx and fight in all directions. 8:30 a.m. The 300 Spartans fold their crimson cloaks with ritualistic precision, each fold exact, each stack uniform, and place them behind the wall. In Sparta, warriors who died in battle were buried in these cloaks. The men folding them know they'll never retrieve them, never feel that red wool again. Some Spartans remove their tunics entirely, fighting in just bronze cuirasses, helmets, greaves, and linen loincloth. They're reducing weight, maximizing mobility for what's coming. The Thespians follow suit. The Thebans hesitate, then most also strip to combat gear. 1,400 men in bronze and iron, standing in formation, waiting for 200,000 Persians to attack from two directions. Think about their mental state for a second. These aren't men in denial about death. They're men who've accepted it completely and moved to a psychological space beyond fear. Spartan training from childhood was designed for exactly this moment, teaching warriors to function in combat situations where survival is impossible, where the only remaining question is how many enemies you kill before you die. The Thespians, lacking that lifelong conditioning, are visibly more afraid. Some are shaking, some are praying to gods they'll meet within hours, but they stand firm nonetheless. 9 a.m. Greek scouts on the high ground south of the pass report Persian movements. The Immortals have completed their descent and are forming up 1 mile behind the Greek position. The main Persian army is assembling to the north in massive formation, not 10,000 this time, but what looks like 50,000 troops preparing for coordinated assault. Xerxes has committed everything. He's going to crush this position with overwhelming force from both directions simultaneously, accepting whatever casualties necessary to finally break these impossible Greeks. Leonidas addresses his 1,400 for the final time. Eat well this morning, for tonight we dine in Hades. It's not bravado, it's practical advice. Fighting for hours requires fuel. The men eat bread, dried meat, and drink watered wine. Some vomit from nerves. Others joke quietly, maintaining the warrior's facade. At 9:30 a.m., Leonidas gives the order that seals their fate. Advance. Phalanx formation. We go forward to meet them. The 1,400 Greeks march north past the wall they've defended for 3 days, move into the wider section of the pass, and stop. They form a circular formation. Spartans in the outer ring facing north. Thespians forming the second ring. Thebans in the center. Shields lock. Spears level. 1,400 men standing in perfect formation, waiting for 250,000 Persians to try and kill them. From the north, Persian war drums begin pounding. From the south, the Immortals' advance horns sound. The final battle is about to begin. The last stand began at mid-morning. Leonidas led the Greeks forward in phalanx formation, and the Persians came at them from the front, while Hydarnes' Immortals descended from the mountain path behind. The Greeks were surrounded completely, fighting on all sides, and they were magnificent. Dories shattered and they drew Xyphos swords. Swords broke and they fought with broken spear shafts. Those broke and they used shields as bludgeons, fists, teeth, anything. Leonidas fell early, taking a Persian spear through his cuirass. 4 times the Spartans drove the Persians back from his body to protect it. Dionysus, the Spartan warrior who joked that if Persian arrows blocked out the sun, they'd fight in the shade, made that joke reality. He died with 17 arrows in him, still standing. The Thespians fought beside the Spartans to the last man. Every single one of them died. Not one fled. The Thebans reportedly tried to surrender and most were killed anyway, though some sources claim they fought to the end as well. 10 a.m. The dual assault begins with precision timing. From the north, 50,000 Persian infantry advance in waves. Medes, Persians, Sake, Bactrians. While from the south, 8,500 Immortals close the trap. The Greeks, in their circular formation, face outward on all sides. The mathematics are staggering. 1,400 400 men, surrounded by roughly 58,500 attackers. That's a 42-to-1 disadvantage, fighting with no possibility of retreat, reinforcement, or escape. The Persians advance cautiously, having learned brutal lessons over 3 days. They don't charge recklessly, they compress slowly, using shields and numbers to squeeze the Greek circle tighter. The fighting begins when both forces reach spear range simultaneously at 10:15 a.m. The sound is indescribable. Thousands of bronze weapons striking bronze shields, men screaming in rage and pain, officers shouting orders that no one can hear. The Greek phalanx holds its circular formation, shields locked, spears thrusting outward in all directions like a bronze sea urchin. Persians die by the dozens trying to break through, but sheer numbers begin forcing the Greeks backward. The circle compresses, 15 meters diameter, then 12, then 10. Here's where weapon attrition becomes critical. Dories are designed for controlled phalanx fighting. They're not meant for the chaotic, all-directional combat the Greeks are now experiencing. Spears snap at a catastrophic rate, roughly 50% within the first 30 minutes. By 10:45 a.m., half the Greeks have transitioned to Xephos swords. The fighting becomes even more intimate and brutal. Persians push close enough to grapple. Greeks stab upward into groins and armpits where armor is weakest. The ground becomes so slick with blood that men on both sides slip and fall, then get trampled or stabbed where they lie. 10:50 a.m. Leonidas, fighting in the front rank facing the main Persian force, takes a spear thrust that punches through his bronze cuirass and into his chest. He doesn't fall immediately. Spartan conditioning keeps him standing, fighting for perhaps 30 more seconds before he collapses. The moment he goes down, the Spartans around him go berserk. They form a tight shield wall over his body and hold against wave after wave of Persians trying to claim the Spartan king's corpse as a trophy. 4 separate Persian assaults try to reach Leonidas's body. 4 times the Spartans drive them back with casualties so severe that Persian officers stop trying. Think about that. Even while dying, Leonidas's body becomes a rallying point that costs Persia hundreds of additional casualties. Dionysus the warrior who joked about fighting in shade makes his prophecy literal. Positioned on the circle's eastern edge, he becomes a target for Persian archers who've climbed to elevated positions on the mountain slopes. Arrows strike him repeatedly, shoulder, thigh, side, back. He pulls them out and keeps fighting. By 11:15 a.m., he has 17 arrows embedded in his body, several through his bronze cuirass, others in unprotected flesh. He's still standing, still holding his shield position, still stabbing with a broken Xephos. When he finally falls, Persian soldiers who later strip his body count the arrows in disbelief. 17, and he'd fought for at least 20 minutes after the first hit. By 11:30 a.m., the Greek circle has been compressed to perhaps 8 meters diameter. Weapons are almost completely gone, dories shattered, Xephos blades broken. Greeks are fighting with shield edges, using the bronze rims as clubs to cave in Persian skulls. Some have abandoned shields entirely and are grappling, strangling, biting. This isn't warfare anymore, it's primal violence between dying men who refuse to stop killing until they're physically incapable of moving. The Thespians, positioned in the circle's second rank, are dying with Spartangent-level courage. Not one breaks formation, not one attempts surrender. When their front-rank fighters fall, second-rank Thespians step forward immediately. When they fall, third rank steps up. The 700 Thespians are being systematically annihilated, and they maintain formation discipline that rivals Sparta itself. By noon, roughly 500 Thespians are dead. The remaining 200 continue fighting. The Theban situation remains controversial. Some sources claim that around 11:45 a.m., when the situation became hopeless, roughly 300 Thebans attempted to surrender, throwing down weapons, raising empty hands, shouting that they'd been forced to fight. Some Persian soldiers accepted the surrender and took them prisoner. Others, enraged by 3 days of casualties, simply killed surrendering Thebans where they stood. Perhaps 100 Thebans were taken alive. The other 300 died fighting or attempting surrender. But here's what's genuinely debated. Some Greek sources claim no Thebans surrendered, that this was anti-Theban propaganda from rival city-states. The truth died with the witnesses. Noon. The Greek circle is now barely 5 meters across, roughly 400 men still standing, pressed together so tightly they can barely move. Their weapons are gone. They're fighting with rocks, broken shield pieces, bare hands. And Xerxes, watching from his throne, makes the decision that proves these Greeks have broken his army's will. He orders his troops to pull back and summons the archers forward. Thousands of them. By noon, the Greeks had been pushed back to a small hillock, now marked by a stone lion statue. The surviving Spartans, perhaps 60 men, formed a final circle, shields outward, fighting with bare hands and broken weapons. The Persians, having lost thousands to these dying men, refused to close for hand-to-hand combat. Xerxes gave an order that revealed his rage and fear. Archers, release. Thousands of arrows arced into the sky and fell like steel rain on the hillock. The last Spartans died as Dionysus had predicted, fighting in the shade of Persian arrows. When the arrows stopped and Persian infantry cautiously approached, they found 1,400 Greek bodies surrounding a circle of red cloaks and shattered bronze. The Persians had lost between 10,000 and 20,000 men over 3 days. The ancient sources say 20,000. Modern historians estimate 10,000 minimum, against 1,400 Greeks. That's a kill ratio of 7-to-1 at minimum, possibly 14-to-1. Xerxes, in unprecedented rage, ordered Leonidas's body decapitated and crucified, a violation of Persian custom that showed how deeply these 300 Spartans had wounded his pride. The hillock was barely 15 meters in diameter, a slight elevation, maybe 3 meters higher than the surrounding pass. Here's what the chronicles don't emphasize. This wasn't a tactical retreat to high ground. This was where the Greeks got compressed when they could physically retreat no further. The surviving 60 Spartans, maybe 40 Thespians, and a handful of wounded Greeks too injured to move, formed the final defensive circle. Most had no weapons left, just shields, fists, rocks. Some were bleeding from multiple wounds. All were exhausted beyond human limits, having fought continuously for over 2 hours in bronze armor under midday August sun. 5 p.m. Persian infantry surrounds the hillock at 10 meters distance, but refuses to advance. Officers scream orders, beat soldiers with clubs, threaten execution. The troops won't move. They've watched these Greeks kill for 3 days straight, watched friends and brothers die in that bronze meat grinder, and every survival instinct screams that closing with these men, even dying men with no weapons, means death. Xerxes, watching from his throne 200 meters away, sees his army paralyzed by 60 dying Greeks, and makes a decision that admits military defeat, even in tactical victory. He orders the archers forward. 5,000 Persian archers, Saka tribesmen, Median specialists, Persian professionals, form up in 3 ranks at 50 meters distance. They knock arrows, draw to full extension, and await the command. The surviving Greeks see what's coming. Some laugh, Dionysus' prophecy fulfilled. Others simply stand, gripping broken shields, waiting. One Spartan name lost to history removes his helmet and spits blood. Then he shouts in Greek, "This is Sparta." The others take up the cry, their voices hoarse from screaming and dehydration. "This is Sparta." 60 men roaring defiance at an empire. Xerxes raises his hand, drops it. 5,000 bowstrings release simultaneously. The sky darkens. Not metaphorically, the afternoon sun literally dims as 15,000 arrows arc upward and block out its light. The arrows reach their apex, hang for a frozen instant, then descend in a steel rain that lasts 3 seconds. The sound is like hail on a bronze roof, amplified 1,000 times, arrows striking shields, armor, flesh, stone. The Greeks crouch behind hoplon shields, the bronze rims creating a protective roof, but there's no complete protection from this volume of projectiles. Arrows punch through bronze where it's thin, find gaps between shields, strike unprotected legs and backs. The first volley ends. Perhaps 20 Greeks are dead, another 15 wounded. The remaining 25 stand back up. Xerxes signals again. Second volley. 15,000 more arrows. The Greeks who still have shields raise them. Those without shields stand upright, facing the arrows. Another 15 Greeks fall. Third volley. Fourth. Fifth. By the sixth volley, no one is standing. But some are still moving, wounded men crawling, trying to lift shields, trying to fight. Seventh volley. Eighth. Ninth. By the 10th volley, 150,000 arrows in total, nothing moves on the hillock. The archery barrage has lasted maybe 5 minutes. The silence that follows is absolute. Persian infantry waits 5 full minutes before approaching, terrified these Greeks might somehow rise again. Officers finally force troops forward at spear point. They climb the hillock cautiously, stepping over arrow-studded bodies. What they find shocks even battle-hardened soldiers. 1,400 Greek bodies, many bristling with dozens of arrows, surrounding positions they'd held to their last breath. Spartans died in formation, shields still locked. Thespians died beside them. The concentration of bodies on the hillock is so dense that soldiers literally walk on corpses. Think about those casualty statistics. Conservative modern estimates: 10,000 Persians dead over 3 days. Ancient sources: 20,000. Against 7,300 total Greek defenders, of whom 5,900 escaped. That means 1,400 Greeks killed between 10,000 and 20,000 Persians, a 7-to-1 to 14-to-1 kill ratio. For comparison, most ancient battles had kill ratios of 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 for the victor. The Greeks lost and still achieved ratios that military historians consider nearly impossible. Hydarnes locates Leonidas's body by the crimson cloak and the bronze cuirass bearing Sparta's lambda symbol. He orders it brought to Xerxes. The great king stares at this 50-year-old corpse that held up his invasion for 3 days, cost him 10,000 to 20,000 soldiers, and humiliated the Persian military before all Asia. His order comes in cold rage: decapitate the body, crucify what remains, and plant it beside the road so every soldier marching south sees what happens to those who defy Persia. Persian soldiers, horrified their culture respects dead enemies, obey reluctantly. Leonidas's head is cut off. His body is nailed to a cross and erected at the pass's edge. This desecration reveals something crucial. Xerxes understood that even in death, these Spartans had won. They'd proven that free men defending their homes were worth more than any number of subjects serving a tyrant. And that truth would cost Persia everything in the battles to come. While the Persians celebrated their victory at Thermopylae, the delay had been catastrophic for their invasion timeline. Those 3 days allowed the Greek city-states to complete evacuation of Athens, position their navy at Salamis, and coordinate a defensive strategy. The 7,000 Greeks who'd withdrawn carried stories of Spartan courage that unified the fractured Greek alliance. Athens' leader Themistocles used those 3 days to convince the Greek fleet to make a stand rather than scatter. The Spartan sacrifice became a rallying cry. If 300 could hold for 3 days, what could all of Greece do together? 30 days after Thermopylae, the Greek fleet destroyed the Persian navy at Salamis. Xerxes, watching his ships burn, withdrew to Persia with most of his army. 1 year later, the remaining Persian forces were annihilated at Plataea by an army led by Leonidas's brother, who'd taken the Spartan throne. The invasion that would have ended Greek independence and snuffed out the birth of Western democracy died because 1,400 men held a pass for 3 days. Here's what military historians don't emphasize enough. Xerxes' invasion timeline was mathematically precise. His massive army consumed approximately 160 tons of food daily, sustainable only through pre-positioned supply depots along the invasion route. Every day of delay meant 1 more day of consumption, 1 day closer to autumn storms that would cut off naval resupply, 1 day for Greek defenses to strengthen. The 3 days at Thermopylae plus 1 additional day clearing the pass of bodies and tending Persian wounded cost Xerxes 4 days total. Those 4 days were enough. August 24th, 480 BC. The 5,900 Greeks who'd escaped Thermopylae reach their respective cities and deliver news that spreads across Greece like wildfire. 300 Spartans and 700 Thespians held the pass for 3 days against 200,000 Persians, killing 10,000 to 20,000 before dying to the last man. The psychological impact is seismic. Greek city-states that had been considering surrender or submission suddenly find their courage. If Leonidas could hold 3 days with 300, what could united Greece accomplish with tens of thousands? The story becomes a rallying cry that transforms fractious city-states into a genuine military alliance. Athens completes its evacuation by August 26th, barely in time. Every civilian, every ship, every movable asset gets transported to Salamis, Aegina, and Troezen. When Xerxes' army reaches Athens on September 22nd, they find an empty city. They burn it anyway, destroying the Acropolis, but it's a hollow victory. The people Athens' real strength have escaped, and the Athenian fleet, 200 triremes representing the largest naval force in Greece, is intact and positioned at Salamis. Here's where Themistocles' strategic genius exploited the delay Leonidas bought. The Athenian leader had been arguing for a naval showdown since before Thermopylae. But Peloponnesian city-states wanted to abandon Athens and defend the Isthmus of Corinth by land. Themistocles needed time to build consensus, to position ships, to create conditions where the Greek fleet would fight rather than scatter. The Thermopylae delay gave him exactly that. By late September, he'd convinced the Greek naval commanders that abandoning the Athenian refugees on Salamis meant moral defeat even if they won the war. September 29th, 480 BC, exactly 30 days after Thermopylae, the Battle of Salamis begins. Themistocles lures the Persian fleet into the narrow straits between Salamis and the mainland, using the same geographic principle Leonidas used. Neutralize superior numbers through terrain. The Persian fleet, roughly 600 warships, enters the straits confident of victory. The 368 Greek triremes, fighting in confined waters where Persian numbers mean nothing, destroy them. Think about those numbers. Greece is outnumbered nearly 2 to 1 at sea, but wins decisively because narrow waters equalize the fight exactly like Thermopylae's narrow pass. Xerxes watches from a golden throne on the shore, the same throne he sat on at Thermopylae, as his fleet burns. By sunset, 300 Persian ships are sunk or captured. Greek losses, 40 ships. The naval superiority that allowed Persia to supply its massive land army is gone. Xerxes faces military mathematics. His army needs resupply from the sea, but the Greek fleet now controls Aegean waters. Autumn storms are coming. If he stays in Greece through winter, his army starves. On October 2nd, he makes the decision that ends the invasion. Withdraw to Asia with most of the army, leaving 80,000 troops under General Mardonius to winter in Greece and finish the conquest in spring. But here's what Xerxes doesn't understand. In August 479 BC, exactly 1 year after Thermopylae, Pausanias, Leonidas's brother, who'd assumed the Spartan throne, leads 38,000 Spartans and 70,000 allied Greeks to face Mardonius at Plataea. The battle lasts 1 day. Persian casualties, 50,000, including Mardonius himself. Greek casualties, roughly 1,500. The Persian survivors flee Greece and never return. The invasion is over. Let that sink in. Xerxes invaded with 250,000 men. After Salamis and Plataea, perhaps 30,000 make it back to Persia alive. The largest invasion force in ancient history suffers a 90% casualty rate, all because 1,400 Greeks bought 3 days of time at a narrow pass. But the real victory wasn't military. It was civilizational. If Thermopylae falls in 1 day, Xerxes reaches Athens before evacuation completes. The Athenian fleet scatters, or surrenders. Salamis never happens. Persian logistics hold. Greece falls. And the 50-year-old democracy in Athens, birthplace of Western political philosophy, theater, mathematics, and rational thought, gets extinguished before it can spread. Instead, Athens survives. Democracy survives. And 2,500 years later, every democratic government on Earth traces its ideological lineage back to those 3 days when 300 Spartans proved that free men defending their liberty are worth more than any number of subjects serving a tyrant. The Greeks erected multiple monuments at Thermopylae, but the most famous was carved by the poet Simonides and placed at the site of the final stand. It reads, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." This wasn't propaganda. It was mathematical truth. The Spartans had lived by a code that valued duty over survival, and they'd proven it with their bodies. But here's what historians discovered. The entire Thermopylae campaign was based on incomplete intelligence. If the Greeks had known about the Oenopian path, they could have defended it properly or chosen a different position. Leonidas walked into that pass with a plan to delay, but not a full understanding of the terrain. Despite this, his tactical genius, the rotations, the false retreats, the aggressive final stand, maximized every advantage the position offered. Modern military academies still study his defensive doctrine: force multiplication through terrain, troop rotation under fire, and aggressive counterattacks to disrupt enemy morale. The Simonides epitaph, just 12 words in ancient Greek, became the most famous military memorial in history. Here's what makes it brilliant. It doesn't glorify victory or even courage. It emphasizes obedience to law. The Spartans didn't stay at Thermopylae because they were braver than other Greeks. They stayed because Spartan law forbade retreat, and they valued legal obligation over life itself. This was a revolutionary concept. Soldiers who fought not for personal glory or survival, but because their society's laws demanded it. The epitaph turned Thermopylae from a military defeat into a philosophical victory about the supremacy of law and duty. But the Greeks erected other monuments too. A stone lion, traditional symbol of Leonidas, was placed on the hillock where the last Spartans died. The Amphictyonic League, a religious alliance of Greek states, commissioned a memorial listing all 300 Spartans by name, a permanent record ensuring their immortality. The Thespians received their own monument, though later sources largely forgot them in favor of focusing on Spartan sacrifice. This historical injustice persists. Most people know about the 300 Spartans. Few know that 700 Thespians died beside them with equal courage. Here's where military analysis gets fascinating. Leonidas operated on critically flawed intelligence. The Phocian assurance that they'd guard the mountain path was taken at face value with no verification, no inspection of the actual defensive position, no assessment of Phocian military capability. Modern military doctrine calls this single-source intelligence failure, relying on one local informant without confirmation. If Leonidas had sent scouts to survey the Oenopian path personally, he'd have discovered two crucial facts. First, the path was wide enough for large forces to traverse. Second, the Phocian defensive position was poorly sited, upslope from the path rather than blocking it directly. Either discovery should have prompted Greek withdrawal or massive reinforcement. Despite this failure, Leonidas's tactical execution was flawless. Modern military academies, West Point, Sandhurst, the École Spéciale Militaire de Saint-Cyr, teach Thermopylae as a case study in defensive warfare. The principles remain valid 2,500 years later. First, terrain selection. Choose ground that neutralizes enemy advantages, cavalry, numbers, mobility. Second, force rotation. Sustain combat effectiveness by cycling fresh troops to the front, preventing exhaustion collapse. Third, psychological warfare. The feigned retreats destroyed Persian morale more effectively than killing, proving that enemy psychology matters as much as enemy casualties. Fourth, accept casualties, to achieve strategic objectives. Leonidas knew his 300 would die, but calculated those deaths would save tens of thousands. Think about these statistics. The Greeks achieved 7-to-1 to 14-to-1 kill ratios while defending numbers considered nearly impossible in ancient warfare. They held for 72 hours against forces 30-to-1 superior. They executed complex tactical maneuvers, rotations, feigned retreats, circular defense under extreme combat conditions. And they did this while operating on flawed intelligence that doomed them from the start. That combination of tactical brilliance and strategic sacrifice is why Thermopylae remains studied worldwide. The British SAS analyzes Thermopylae for small unit tactics against numerically superior forces. Israeli defense forces study the psychological warfare aspects, how to make enemies fear attacking, even when victory seems certain. U.S. Marine Corps uses it to teach the concept of acceptable losses in service of mission, that some objectives justify knowing you won't survive achieving them. Russian military academies examine the force multiplication through terrain selection. Chinese strategists study how the battle's propaganda value exceeded its tactical results. But here's what modern analysis reveals that ancient sources missed. Leonidas might have known about the Anapaea path all along. Some historians argue the Phocian defense was deliberately weak, that Leonidas recognized the bypass was indefensible with available forces, and that his real strategy was always to hold until flanked, then die fighting to maximize delay and psychological impact. If true, this makes Thermopylae even more remarkable. Not a heroic last stand forced by circumstances, but a calculated suicide mission executed perfectly. The truth? We'll never know. What we do know is that 2,500 years later, every military officer studies those 3 days, and the lessons keep teaching themselves. Terrain matters, discipline defeats numbers, and free men defending liberty fight with ferocity no conscript army can match. But the real legacy isn't military, it's civilizational. And that legacy was written in a language more powerful than bronze and blood. 2,500 years later, Thermopylae means something beyond military history. It represents the moment when a tiny free society faced annihilation by empire and chose to fight rather than submit. The Spartans who died there, warriors who owned no wealth, who lived communally, who valued honor above life, became symbols of resistance against overwhelming odds. Their stand echoed through history. In 1571, when Christians referenced Thermopylae before Lepanto. In 1836, when defenders of the Alamo saw themselves as Texan Spartans. In 1940, when Churchill invoked their memory during Britain's darkest hour. But the real legacy is simpler and more profound. 300 men proved that free citizens defending their home are worth more than any number of conscripts serving a tyrant. Xerxes had the largest army ever assembled. Leonidas had men who'd chosen to be there. The math seemed impossible, but for 3 days in a narrow pass, freedom was worth more than numbers. And when the arrows finally fell and the red cloaks lay still, Western civilization had bought itself a future with the currency of Spartan blood. October 7th, 1571. The Holy League fleet, a Christian coalition of Spanish, Venetian, and Papal ships, faces the Ottoman navy at Lepanto in waters off western Greece. Before battle, the Spanish commander Don Juan of Austria addresses his 20,000 soldiers and sailors. Remember the Spartans at Thermopylae. They were 300 against an empire. We are 20,000 against tyranny. If they could hold 3 days, we can win this day. The Christian fleet destroys 230 Ottoman galleys and kills 30,000 Turkish sailors, ending Ottoman naval dominance in the Mediterranean. The reference to Thermopylae, 1,651 years after the battle, shows how deeply Leonidas' stand had embedded itself in Western military consciousness. March 6, 1836. The Alamo Mission in San Antonio, Texas. 189 defenders, Americans and Tejanos, face 1,800 Mexican troops under General Santa Anna. For 13 days they hold, knowing reinforcement won't arrive, knowing they're doomed. Colonel William Travis writes his famous letter, "I shall never surrender or retreat. Victory or death." When Mexican forces finally storm the walls, every defender dies fighting. Texas newspapers immediately invoke Thermopylae. Like Leonidas and his 300, Travis and his men chose honor over survival. The parallel is mathematically apt. Both forces outnumbered 10-1. Both held for days beyond reasonable expectations. Both died to buy time for their nations to mobilize. Texas wins independence 7 weeks later at San Jacinto, using the time the Alamo defenders bought with their lives. June 4th, 1940. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill addresses Parliament after Dunkirk evacuation. France is falling. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany. Churchill invokes ancient history. "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. And if the British Empire lasts for 1,000 years, men will say, 'This was their finest hour,' as we now say of the Spartans at Thermopylae." He's drawing explicit parallel. Sparta faced Persian invasion alone after allies fell. Britain faces Nazi invasion alone after allies fell. The message to British citizens: if 300 Spartans could stand against 250,000, Britain's 1.5 million troops can defend against Hitler's forces. The psychological impact is measurable. British morale stabilizes, resistance stiffens, and Germany never attempts invasion. Here's what makes Thermopylae unique among military defeats. It became more culturally powerful than most victories. Marathon, where Greeks defeated Persians decisively, is barely remembered outside academic circles. Thermopylae, where Greeks lost but died magnificently, is globally famous. Why? Because it crystallizes a universal human question: what are you willing to die for? The Spartans answered definitively: liberty, duty, honor, law. Their answer resonates across cultures and centuries because it confronts every person with the same choice: submit to overwhelming power, or resist knowing you'll lose but die free. Think about the counterfactual for a second. If Leonidas withdraws on day 1 when he sees Persian numbers, what happens? Xerxes reaches Athens 5 days earlier, before evacuation completes. The Athenian fleet trapped in harbor or scattered fleeing never concentrates at Salamis. The naval battle never happens. Persian logistics hold. Greece falls within months. Democracy, 50 years old, dies. Western philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, never develops beyond infancy. Theater, mathematics, rational inquiry, all extinguished or absorbed into Persian imperial culture. The Renaissance, 1,900 years later, has no classical Greek texts to rediscover because they were never written. The Enlightenment has no Athenian democratic model to revive. Western civilization as we know it doesn't exist. That's not hyperbole, that's historical causation traced through 2,500 years. Athens survived because 300 Spartans bought 3 days. Democracy survived because free citizens proved they'd die before submitting. Western civilization survived because Leonidas understood that some things are worth more than survival. The epitaph says it perfectly. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. Not we died gloriously, not we were brave, just we obeyed our laws. The laws that said retreat is forbidden, duty is absolute, and freedom is worth any price." On August 20th, 480 BC, 1,400 men made a choice that echoes 2,000. 500 years later, every time someone faces impossible odds and decides to stand anyway. Every time a free society faces tyranny and refuses to submit. Every time an individual chooses principle over survival. The Spartans didn't win at Thermopylae. They just refused to lose the way tyrants expected them to on their knees. begging for mercy. They lost standing up, fighting, killing, and dying free. And that refusal to submit changed human history forever. 3 days, 15 meters wide, 1,400 men. The birth of Western civilization, bought with bronze and blood in a narrow pass where freedom proved worth more than numbers. That's Thermopylae. That's the legacy. And that's why we still tell this story 2,500 years later.